Good morning. It's morning edition. Let's talk about schools because we haven't, and I've put this off mostly because that's my, for everything that I say and people appreciate the truth, there's also a challenge for me because it makes me less and less able to less and less able to work in these institutions anymore. So I've held up on schools. School closures look more likely. This is today. This needed to happen so long ago. So if you are new to Minneapolis schools, the CDD, the Comprehensive District Design, was pushed through during COVID. And it was a disaster, and it was highly controversial, and it proved to be a disaster. I have said to people the greatest gift to private schools in the Twin Cities area was the CDD, especially for schools like Blake, Minnehaha, De La Salle, Cretin, Durham Hall, SPA. They were all having enrollment challenges before the CDD, and then it was like, we're good. But so from just a structural point, again, like all these systems are structures. I'll show you this text. Built to serve 43,000, now only has about 29. It's even lower than that. And it's not only that at capacity, kids aren't learning. So, little brief history of schools. They were always private schools, and public schools came about 110, 120 years ago. Not that long in the grand scheme, 100 years ago. And had their heyday boom with the baby boomers. So schools like Blake, Breck, Minnehaha, SPA, those predate public schools. Schools were largely done by Catholic schools. Those were schools. So public schools are pretty new in the grand scheme of things. One-room schoolhouses were actually where my grandparents started their careers, and my great-grandparents were the teachers in the one-room schoolhouse. And then that changed into the institution that we know today, post-World War II, like most things. So you probably be like, Becca, I know about schools. My kids go to school. I know about school. But do you know about school? Because that is where that's the factory of our brains. Now, what happened, so in the 1970s and 80s was the first time schools left some of their mandates. And there was a big exodus of schools and violence in schools. And that's when we left. As a kid, my sister and I were beat up, and my mom was like, nope. So I didn't end up graduating from MPS. I went to Minnehaha Academy. Cheers. And so MPS kind of recovered. They had a massive hit. They closed schools in the 80s, closed them. Kind of recovered, and then charter schools came around. So public schools have been traditionally a monopoly. Let's be real. They're a monopoly on the community's education. They were set up that way, like financially, is based on property taxes. So in the 1980s, my parents, for example, obviously I just said, sent me to Minnehaha Academy, but I know a lot of people who moved out of the city. They went to Edina, they went to Minnetonka, they went to St. Louis Park. This was common for city schools for my generation, except for not that, my generation. Sorry, the song's in my head now. So then the response to declining enrollments in the 80s and 90s was, now we're going to give different offerings because now we have charter schools. So charter schools were supposed to be the thing that was going to differentiate public education, because public education was failing. Public schools, the monopoly. Parents wanted choices, and parents of lower income would complain, rightfully so, of families like that could send their kids to private school. Although private school, I will just tell you because I know it so well, they offer myriad scholarships, so many. But so they said, well, we should have options, right? Because some families can't afford to move. Some families can't afford to go to private school. I've lived that. So the solution was to create charter schools. Well, charter schools just further devalued the brand of major public school institutions in major cities, and MPS was top of the list. So charter schools originally were meant to be and became like the arts magnet, the environmental magnet, the science school. And charter schools were very specific, and they were meant to be smaller and funded and be that type of way. But then charter schools became a prolific grift. I have worked in charter schools, and they all have challenges. Every school has a challenge. Like every church has a challenge. Like every institution has a challenge. I am not seeking perfection, and I'm not advocating for perfection. But you right-size the ship in private enterprise. You have to, because your monetary value, your survival requires that, right? Public institutions can become unwieldy behemoths that don't succeed because they are tied to public money. And those of us in the public, if you critique like, hey, I want my money back, everyone will call you all sorts of names these days. So then charter schools come around, and now public and private are both competing against charter. But all the education, I was just talking with somebody about this a month ago. If you watch this video, the education ends up being the same, except for I will say, the education really does end up being the same, which I could go into and above and beyond, because it's not in public schools for the average student, but a top tier, if you're in all honors classes as a public school kid, you get as good or better education than private school. But you have to endure the gauntlet of the chaos that happens in public schools that does not happen in private schools. So the probability of success is much smaller in that environment. But so then that started a competitive market. I one time got in a beef with an administrator. I said, this is about educating kids. She goes, this is about a marketplace. And I was like horrified. And shocker, she has a master's in public policy. But schools are both competing for children and families, and they have a mandate to educate. It's like Hollywood. It's an art, but it's also a business. Charlton Heston said it best. The moment I heard that, I've been quoting him ever since. School's the exact same way. So MPS then tried to make offerings to compete with both private schools and charter schools. But what they did is they just devalued everything. And anyone with half a brain knows it. And anybody in the institution knows it. You threw the baby out with the bathwater. You diluted your financial profile to have all these things that aren't working. And every little micro school requires administrative teams, requires, counseling teams, requires special ed teams. When if you're in-house in these larger schools would be at capacity, you'd have all of that in one spot in-house, and you wouldn't dilute. But then the teachers union comes in and fights it. And that's the MFT turning into MFE was such a middle finger to teachers, okay? Teachers, Minneapolis Federation of Teachers turning into Minneapolis Federation of Educators was a big middle finger to teachers, because teachers, inside of 2 years, teachers already are outside of the equation. There are no jobs for teachers, none. I know this because I search almost every day. There are no jobs because they've all gone to special ed or paraprofessionals, because those are, well, not special ed, but paraprofessionals are cheaper and the district can get away with it. So the union became larger on purpose to wield power, Marsha Howard, but it has diluted. It's no longer fighting for teachers, IMO, and I know it because I'm there. But so with 10 seconds left, let's just show what needed to happen. They needed to close the schools. Rainy day funds are in short supply. I've predicted this. Here's our rainy day. I'll tell you. If we just say one thing more now about just actual money. Okay? It says, let's look again, because I got cut off. Rainy day funds are in short supply and state and federal funding prospects are bleak. This goes into everything I've been saying for so long, and I've been raising the alarm, and I've taken the hits for it because because I make these TikToks, sometimes I'll see videos of people saying, like, when you're early in life, right? When you're predictively early, like you see it before everybody else sees it. Inevitably, you're vilified because the masses are in there. They don't see it because they're in their stupor because they don't think independently. Sorry, but true. But so when you see it early, you're not wrong. You're just early and you have to suffer the consequences. So that's my journey. But I have been saying this for at least 2 years, if not 10. And now the check comes due. So rainy day fund is just that's not a real thing. It's the general fund, and it's the buffer zone of general fund. Okay, like I'll just my personal fiscal. I went through my savings to complete running for office because I was like, I'm like all in. So if my donations, like I had to pay my own bills, right? As I'm like plow forward, I went through that. To me, it was a calculated risk that didn't necessarily pan out, right? So now my rainy day fund is gone. Okay, that was my savings. That's what that means. The general fund has a buffer, so that you don't get to critical mass. Schools and I are in the same shape. I'm at my critical mass. Got to keep the lights on. But they've been to try to in an effort to convince themselves they weren't wrong, which they were wrong many years ago. The CDD, people were warned in advance of that, and they still did it. And the people on that board who voted that through, many of them are gone. And honestly, like, sometimes I want to be like, shame on you to the electeds who passed through idiotic things like Lisa Bender, who ran away to Minnetonka after she destroyed this city. Jacob Fry, at least, is staying put and trying to fix it. Lisa Bender just turned tail and ran away, and now she orchestrates all the new DSA candidates. But we're talking about schools right now, not the city. They're all one big thing. But the electeds who pushed through, the school board members who pushed through the CDD, a lot of them aren't on the school board anymore. But honestly, so many people just didn't want to face it. They were cowardly. I've said this before. Like, it takes a little bit of cowardice of powerful people to perpetuate grift and be complicit in fraud and throw the baby out with bathwater and make children and elderly vulnerable. It's because you don't have the stones to do what your election certificate mandates, and that's tell the truth and make the hard decisions. So people put it off and put it off and put it off and put it off and put it off, and here we are. So the rainy day fund was after making terrible decisions, trying to convince yourself it's not wrong. So if you do it once, it's like, well, I'm just dipping into this once. But then you do it the next year. And this is what the city is starting to do too. Well, we're going to dip in the next year. You know, it's just once. Things are going to turn around. And that's why I'm like, with this city, and that's all this, like, clanging the bell, like, it's not going to turn around because it's structural, okay? It's like the Titanic didn't need to hit the iceberg, but once it did, and the iceberg ripped a hole in its hull, you had a much different problem. And what's happening in the cities and what has happened in schools is it's like the violinists are playing on the deck of the Titanic, and meanwhile the chief engineer and the captain are like, we just need to turn the ship. And it's like, too late. Too late. I shouldn't laugh, but like, I have. If you don't laugh, you'll cry or get really angry. I don't like to cry about schools, and I'm sick of being angry, so that is actually what's happening. It's like the superintendent of schools and like the union leaders, and then like, certain council members are on the deck of the Titanic, and the DSA is like playing their fiddles. The rest of us are scrambling for lifeboats. And they're like, well, I think we just need to turn the ship. And it's like, yeah, that was like 2 miles back. We're living it, you guys. We're living it. But so besides the rainy day fund, the second thing said state and federal funding prospects are bleak, right? Bleak. It's been bleak for years. State and federal funding prospects are bleak. Here's not a shocker. The union still opposes as educators. We are vehemently against the prospect of closing schools. As educators, you should want to keep your job and make sure that children get educated. What do you care about a brick and mortar building? It's because of the fact that that's contradictory, because actually what that's doing is just uploading administrative costs, which I know for a fact is what all the teachers get angry about and why they struck. It's because they're like, there's money, there's just loads of administrative costs, and they're right. And also that the administration costs are not necessarily at the district, although they're at the schools. So I said this in 2024. I said with Trump winning re-election, like everybody in the city of Minneapolis, every institution has to get their house in order, and schools are first, and the city is doing it, and the park board's doing it. Like the new park board is, but like you have to get your house in order because Trump is not gonna play. And what was the first thing he did? He not only cut off USAID and went through with his Doge cuts and got rid of everything, which, guess what? Since that's happened, I've studied it more and more and more and more and more. Every institution is at risk with POTUS, okay? And I'm not just talking about 45, 47. I am talking about there's a difference between constitutionality, or in the case of Minneapolis, the charter, and executive decisions that just became tradition, okay? Because we've got a lot of, that's just the way we've done it, right? A lot of that, and I know this because I was elected. There's a lot of, well, we've just always done it this way, versus hard law, legal citation, you have to do it this way, right? So we've just always done it this way, right, is what Trump put a wrecking ball to, okay? And it's squishy. And people like Ellison suing the feds on repeat, like that's the only maneuver he has, like whack-a-mole. And with SCOTUS, okay, the Supreme Court, it's just delayed gratification for 45, 47 with these lawsuits, because the Supreme Court is not like, you guys, I'm laughing because, like, put the puzzle pieces together. The chess match, it's like we're the ideology that runs the city of Minneapolis is so outmanned and outmatched that it's just like, so also the Department of Education is getting slammed. And then of course we've got massive fraud at the state level. There's no way to save MPS. But yet this is like so detached. I can't stand it. As I said the greatest moment, I always get cut off. The greatest moment of community input is election day, okay? But we've got this quote. We just have to decide with parents where this will take place. The board's decision will be based on parent and community input. And that's a quote from Sharon Elamine, and I like Sharon a lot. But Sharon, I will say this. You are elected to make that really hard decision. The more that you dilute it with, we want to continue to talk to parents and community, the community changes, the parents change. I worked so hard, you know this, to get softball fields for girls to help MPS pointedly, and I used my leverage in the park board to create fields, and a major stakeholder, parent, he said to me, we talked about it all the time, he was like, I know I'm driving the bus on this in a lot of ways and keeping it afloat, but this won't even affect my daughters. And sure enough, I just saw the pictures. His daughter graduated this weekend. She's not going to be the beneficiary of the work that we did. So it's like, to involve current parents is pointless. This is a full episode of The Becca Show. I finally just did an actual 20-minute episode, and we talked about schools the whole time, and I held in my hand. Let's put this, send it to YouTube. All right, I'll see you out there.